Hey everyone, it's Guillaume from Startup Basecamp. Welcome to Tech for Climate podcast. During the show, you will have the opportunity to meet the best climate tech founders, investors, experts from Silicon Valley and around the globe. They will share with you their stories and personal journey in this growing industry, giving you some insights on the ecosystem to hopefully help you to take part in the climate change fight and benefit from the opportunities that it can also represent. The podcast is divided in two small interviews. During the first part, you will get to know our speaker, their perspective on the climate crisis, and how climate tech is changing the game. The second part of the talk will be for our members of the community who will learn from the speakers their secret sauce on how to, sharing with you their unique expertise on various topics as fundraising, management, strategy, and so on to help you to become a better leader in your field. Let's go for the show. Hi everyone, in today's episode we will speak with Andreea Constantinescu Partner at Planet First Partners. She will share with you her amazing story, starting from Goldman Sachs in M&A to the transition into climate tech investments. You will learn in more detail the investment thesis of Planet First, a growth equity investment fund with two major themes: better for the planet, better for the people, with a focus on EU HQ companies. Andrea will share with you how they developed a complex framework to measure impact and make their investment decision with an innovative and systemic approach. Finally, she will share with you the underdog areas in climate tech in which she sees exciting potential for investments and growth. In the second part of the show, Andrea will share her secret sauce to increase your odds to fundraise successfully. You will learn some key red flags that makes investors pass on deals. Finally, you will get a few valuable tips on work-life balance for founders and investors. Andrea, welcome to the show. Hi, Andrea. Welcome to the Tech for Climate podcast. We are super happy to have you here with us. So before we start, could you please give us a 30-second introduction about Planet First Partners?
Hi, Guillaume. Nice to be with you and your audience. Planet First Partners, we are an evergreen investment platform focused on growth equity investment in the sustainability area with two big themes: better for the planet, better for people. So the name has it all. Okay. And we're based in London. We are based in London, so maybe that's a really important fact, and focused on European headquartered businesses or businesses headquartered elsewhere that have a real strategic angle or focus in entering Europe, for example, where we can be of help in that way.
Fantastic. So let's start from the top. Can you tell us a bit more about your story and background? Anything specific about you that's not public yet? Maybe something that you like to do or don't like?
Well, look, I think it's everyone that ends up, working in this industry has their own story about transitioning. And I'm a contributor to Icarus Complex, which is a magazine on the topic of sustainability and very much focused on solutions to climate change. And it's a very multidisciplinary magazine. So I'm a writer there. And when I interview people quite often, and what I'm passionate about is people's transitioning, their personal transitioning story. So mine is as follows. I actually started on the dark side. I started my career at Goldman Sachs in M&A, moved over to the, investing in private equity. And I had the great luck to work under a visionary at a fund called Mid Europa Partners, where we mapped out in the late 2000s the entire renewable energy arena in Central Europe. And so that was probably my first touch with the area of, let's say, climate investing. And probably the moment that I knew that there's a special feeling when you work on projects where both your career and your values are aligned was doing a transaction called Energy 21 in Czech Republic, which was the largest operating PV plant. So that was in 2010. It took me another 10 years to ultimately throw in the towel finally and move to making a full-time career in the sustainability space. But the journey was not a straight line. It took some time, and I think the area is now mature enough for many others to follow. So I invite everyone that needs a little bit of inspiration to reach out.
Okay, but who is Andrea? What do you like besides being a successful investor?
Well, I guess I'm the underlying reason. I love the ocean. I love to surf. I love to sail. I love to dive. And so whenever I find myself in that environment, this belief and desire to really bring my own contribution to the space is renewed, and I come back with a lot of inspiration. So it really helped that I managed to spend the last lockdown in a small surfing town in Brazil. So coming back to London now that everything is open is I come back with a lot of energy to make a real contribution to the sustainability arena.
So can you give us your overview of the ClimateTech ecosystem today? Where are we at? What needs to happen to have the ClimateTech ecosystem being able to fully support the 2050 net zero goal, according to you? And I know it's a very large question, so please feel free to go for it.
Yeah, so look, I think the answer lies in how we set up Planet First, because it's a new platform. And so we asked ourselves exactly that when setting it up. And there's two answers to that. One is, as it's the bigger, picture question around what is driving the investability of this area that was not there, let's say 20 years ago, or in the previous clean tech bust of early 2000s. And at least our thesis is that it's the interaction of three big megatrends, which is technological maturity, it's societal demand, and it's scarcity of natural resources. And so these three aspects interacting right now make it economically viable at scale to invest in the technologies that are going to enable the economy to transition to a net zero over the next 20 years. We probably have 2 business cycles to do this. But that's our thesis now. Why growth equity? I mean, the answer why it's growth equity as well is the following. I had in my career at least done, I had invested across a variety of asset classes. So when I approached the idea of, okay, how do you, if you were to start from scratch, what investment mandate or what asset class is the right asset class for, this point of development, of investment in sustainability, I mapped out the continuum from seed or university level, kind of very early stage investing, to venture, Series A, Series B, growth, private equity, and then public markets. And when you look at this continuum, we notice that, both myself and my founding partners have noticed separately, in fact, and we concluded why growth equity, that everything up to growth equity was relatively well invested, i.e. there were plenty of portfolios invested by Series A and Series B investors, and even earlier stage than that, that had nurtured these companies for the last 5 to 10 years. And there is a bottleneck at growth. There are very few investors at the moment at which these companies have a proven technology and they just need that scale up capital. And so that's why we think that growth equity is the right strategy, let's say, benefiting from white space, but also from this, this is only made possible by all of the efforts of the earlier stage investors in this area and these verticals of the economy. So yeah, that's a longer answer, but those are the two aspects that basically were the top of our mind when we established the firm.
Okay, and can you let us know a little bit more about for the growth equity? I mean, what is the typical check size that you guys write to the founders, and what do you offer to the founders in your portfolio to support them?
So the way that we define it and this is obviously probably going to evolve because as the industry grows, I suppose that there will be more capital brought to the markets, fund size will evolve, and everything will go bigger. But today, where we are is we intend to write equity checks of 10 to 30 million, plus minus 20 millions from co-investors. So this leads us to quite a broad, size bucket between 10 and 50 in total, which allows us to ultimately participate to funding rounds up to 150 million, if you think, in the more capital intensive verticals such as energy transition or industry 4.0. So it's a size that allows us to make ecosystem investments at the low end and really be participating in the real scale-ups in the asset-heavy part of the thesis, part of the pipeline.
Yeah, sorry. Can you give us some examples, maybe on your previous investments? What makes them special? Maybe the team, the market, technology. How do you source also those founders and team? I mean, in a way, who should come to pitch you?
So we've imposed. So as I said, we have a very strict mandate. We are an Article 9 fund, the darkest shade of green, which means that we are only investing in companies that are on one side ready for growth equity, which means that the technology is largely proven, that the unit economic is well established, and the economic viability of the entire business model is established. So that's on the size maturity standpoint. From an impact perspective, we only invest in companies that are making a material contribution to the sustainability development goals. And in terms of how we determine that, on the companies that have a primarily climate positive area of impact rather than a social impact side, we guide ourselves by the European Union Green Taxonomy that has just come into force, and it's probably the first time that we have real thresholds by operating activity that really determine what is material contribution by subsector of the economy and what is not. So we've imposed quite stringent guardrails, at least with regards to environmental impact, because here the thresholds are established, and so we are looking to partner and support companies that are, again, looking to that have technologies that are proven in the area of climate and social impact. And it's with the way we're organized, and I think that will explain a bit more. It's basically across the economy. So we are, let's say, generalist investors, which means that there are quite a lot of funds that are focused on one vertical or another. We have 6 verticals that literally span the entire economy, going from energy transition, industry 4.0, green cities, so everything that is happening in an urban center, everything from mobility to construction to green living. Ag tech, which is basically from synthetic biology, the seed, to everything with distribution and logistics, to one of the greatest successes of my partners was the investment in Oatly, so that the consumer brands are probably the end of that ag tech vertical. Circularity, which we are trying to support businesses that are by design eliminating waste, so the sharing economy and so on. And lastly, consumer health and wellness. So as you can see, we have a really broad thematic, which allows us ultimately to avoid some of the areas where we see a lot of froth in the market and focus on the area where we think that we can, partner more substantially with the partners and drive both impact and returns for our investors. And so I guess one thing to clarify is that we do expect to have market returns. Yeah, so there will be no compromise when it comes to returns. Therefore, we're doing our analysis and our financial work just as any other fund, and are aiming to deliver market returns at growth stage.
So that gives me, I mean, I think that's a good segue to go to the next question that we spoke about. So what are the sectors are the most promising for you today in terms of like impact, cash, return, this ICR, so meaning building impactful companies while creating highly profitable business that you guys see today?
Yeah, so the most exciting verticals where we see the most pipeline and we really see the commercial viability of these businesses accelerating as a result of real demand in the market from corporates is in a couple of areas. And I would probably start with the areas that are less maybe hot when you read the newspaper, but for me this is quite exciting because we can be the first in those markets, which is material science. So an area, for example, like fashion is in certain aspects a real material polluter, is probably the second most polluting sector of the economy, and has been relatively slow to really shift its practices. And we see great development in material science along everything from finding bio-based substitution to fossil fuel derived materials like polyester, which is a very commonly used thread, to the processing of the materials. We're looking at companies that have proven technologies in digital printing, for example, completely eliminating the pollution from dyes, to companies that are bringing just completely new processing in terms of recycling materials. So we see recycling cashmere and real and spider silk and loads of like really exciting materials that are now where the technology is mature enough to really bring these innovations to market, to the mass channel. We're not talking about really high-end brands that could afford these very, very expensive materials. We think that we're now crossing over to these technologies being mature to be commercially scalable. So that's really, really exciting. Other verticals where we see loads of exciting developments, from the farm to fork vertical, so much development from everything like intelligent protein design, using in some cases proteins to eliminate other unhealthy sugar substitutes, all the way to businesses that eliminate food wastage, to SaaS businesses that allow for enabling the communication between farmers and big companies like Nestle and Starbucks. So really along the entire chain of farm, or even earlier than the farm, let's say synthetic biology, to logistics and distributions, to new brands, challenging and changing the way that the industry operates. It's really, really exciting. And maybe lastly, if I could say, and you'll see how, I mean, the challenge is maybe in the energy transition, because maybe the energy transition, this is where my own personal transition started, because I had the exposure very early in my career, but it's so nice to have followed this industry, for example, to see how it goes. It went from, PV being only let's say investable as a result of subsidies, and then wind developing at scale, and all of these things kind of reaching a scale where they're economically viable without subsidies. We're now kind of seeing that entire development in the hydrogen space, and really, really excited to see that European Union has a real strategy and a plan to decarbonize the economy, where hydrogen is the only economically viable answer, and it's really exciting. But we're also seeing companies really leveraging the technologies to enable energy independence for individual homes. So across the board, from consumer to these very large, steel manufacturers being decarbonized. Hydrogen is really proving economically viable, which really was a dream, let's say 10, 20 years ago. So again, across the entire, spectrum of the economy, there's just a lot of really great opportunities to look at.
So, and I understand there's so many different. I mean, speaking with the different guests on the podcast and different investors, we realize that really, like, in fact, climate tech is so huge. And but I like to understand, and that's always like a question that we like to ask. It's in terms of impact. You mentioned that you guys are following the European guidelines in terms of impact in itself. So, do you have any specific process or framework in-house that you use to base your investment decision on? Do you rely on scientists or experts to validate the tech in the impact? I don't know, is there any specific more like criteria related to CO2 impact in itself, or maybe social impact? How that works in on your side?
Okay, so I will start with, again, the big picture principles that determined how we designed, the impact process that we have, so that you understand kind of like how that also evolved. So we started with the big picture desire to invest in the area of sustainability, and we chose the sustainability development goals because they are commonly agreed upon. So these areas have been, the area of sustainability has been debated internationally for many, many years, and these are now consensual. So we wanted to start with consensus. So, okay, these are, and then the sustainability development goals were set up for governments, however. So in interpreting these to make them investable, we basically looked at the challenges underpinning humanity being able to reach the sustainability development goals. And then we mapped out where they occur in the real world. And this is basically how we built our impact framework that sits at the core of how we assess every single company. And then, and then when it comes to, we basically have this big database that maps out the areas of potential, positive impact of each subsector of the economy, and which are the SDGs that it can positively impact. And then for each of these, wherever the current taxonomy has a key threshold, it's obviously in there. Now, in terms of process, so this was the big picture that informed our approach. We have my colleague Sergio Carvalho is our head of impact. He was a former National Secretary of Biodiversity of Brazil. He is a biologist and a scientist, and he's just finished his PhD in sustainability in Oxford. So he was the mastermind behind this impact framework, and he is he runs the entire process on the impact side. And this process, because we had the chance to basically start from scratch, we stepped back and we said, how should we do this? Well, because there were no other precedents, we looked around and asked how many of our peers do it, and some of them, some of them do it in-house, some of them maybe use third parties, but ultimately nobody had there are no steps to follow. So we decided to make our own. So basically we have an impact framework that really substantiates our value set with regards to impact, determines what is green and what is not. And so there's many companies that just don't have a material, I mean, they do great things, but those things are non-material an impact, and sometimes we have to say no to companies. So that's the first thing. It really is guardrails that come with opportunities but also limitations, and we have now and so the impact process runs very much in parallel with the investment process, i.e. When a teaser, let's say, comes in from a potential startup, we look at it from both an investability standpoint, but also from an impact perspective. And so we have to clearly identify the area of positive contribution and figure out exactly what are the KPIs and try to develop an impact thesis at the same time as we develop the investment thesis. let's say that this company advances, it gets to term sheet and due diligence, just as we validate our impact thesis in the same way that we validate our investment thesis, and we have a value creation plan and we have an impact creation plan that we agree, and basically that sits at the heart of what is agreed with our partners, fellow shareholders, with the management team, and that really codifies our common alignment around these two aspects. And once the company, let's say, we make the investment as part of our portfolio, we then have key KPIs that we monitor and that we report on. And obviously, it's always very, very particular to the investment and and to the impact thesis that we're underwriting. And we try to obviously be quite thoughtful and not overburden early stage companies with too much rubber stamping. The idea is more to cleverly design something that is able to not help the company only report their impact, but also really come up with creative strategies to turn positive impact in positive value creation, because ultimately that is our mission. And that in terms of how that's perceived, we get this question all the time, like are companies pushing back? And it's really interesting. Companies that are likely to end up in our portfolio love it. They love that they can finally have a meeting of minds with people that care about the same things and are doing things properly and scientifically backed and so on. So most of the time it's a great differentiator for us, and it generates a lot of positive traction for us in the process.
So thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's a very valuable point. Is that something that you guys plan in the future to share with the other investors, or in terms of like frameworks or step by step to really like ensure more going into this impact / financial return, or is more something that at this stage we're still grinding it and improving it, and then maybe one day?
No, we are very collaborative. In fact, Sergio, our head of impact, sits on the European Union platform for sustainable investment. And so we're trying to also, sometimes we make small investment in earlier stage funds, and sometimes we help more mainstream finance funds to kind of start taking the first steps towards, let's say, the ESG more broadly. We are extremely collaborative, and we hopefully will want to make this, to bring a lot of transparency and to even publish the reports and our approach, and make it open source, if you will. We'd love for more people to really take this robust science-based approach to measuring impact. And by the way, whilst normally we focus on we don't focus only on amplifying impact creation. We also do, whenever we do our impact assessment, it's 360. So let's say that we invest in a company because they have a technology that can save a lot of water. We also make sure that this company does not do any other harm in any other area. So the impact assessment is 360. We don't just focus narrowly on the one, the key positive area. And that's something that I really wanted to stress, because ultimately, that and that process, we believe that every single firm should do.
That's fantastic. So how can the community of listeners can help you today?
Send me any ideas around companies that can really move the needle and make the world a better place. You have to share my email after. Look, I think it's everyone is a consumer. Everybody votes with their money, right? So making those changes in your consumption, informing yourself about these topics, I think is really important. And making those changes, basically being an early adopters of all of these technologies, that's the best way that I think listeners can really help. Listeners can also help by ultimately choosing as I did, to align their careers with their value set as well, and basically transition, let's say, in their own way, because there's always there's always something that you can do, in any area of the economy. Opportunities are popping up. So be curious and find your own journey if that's where your value set is.
Any question I should have asked and I did not?
I I don't know. Let me think what I want to what I want to tell your audience. Look, I think I actually think there is a question. Like um, with anything that brings a lot of growth and excitement comes the risk that there are a lot of people that use the label to call themselves a green or so basically sometimes I fear that the industry might lose its that the word sustainability and ESG gets used too widely, basically, and that it loses its credibility with everybody from consumers, investors, regulators. And that's my biggest fear. Ultimately, I want to highlight that we saw a tremendous amount of sustainability labels, ETFs. There's just a lot of funds popping up, and I really do encourage people to really do their work, to read the small font, and to make sure that if they get involved, if they invest, to really proceed with care, because right now these efforts to regulate the industry are very early on, and very encouraging. Things are moving at a pace that is really accelerated and really encouraging, but we're still operating in a largely uncharted territory.
Thank you so much, Andrea. It was a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much for sharing your time, all of those insights. Thank you so much for taking, all of your efforts and time at work to make the climate crisis something that we can all win together. So thank you so much, and hope we can stay in touch and follow up in the future with you guys.
We'd love that, and look forward to hearing the stories of all the great entrepreneurs and fellow investors in the future. So best of luck with the podcast.
Thank you so much.